In the summer of 1944, the world had approximately 70 million men under arms. The United States military today has 1.4 million. This video asks one question. What happens when those two realities meet on the same battlefield? The scenario: the US military in its current configuration fights every major army of World War II simultaneously. Not one side, all of them, combined. The forces: the Wehrmacht at its 1941 peak, the Red Army of 1945, the Imperial Japanese Army and Navy, the US Army of 1944, the historical one, the Free French, Nationalist China, Italy at full wartime strength, combined manpower, approximately 70 million soldiers, over 700,000 aircraft, tens of thousands of tanks, industrial supply chains at total war capacity, the United States today, 1.4 million active personnel, 6,000 tanks, 2,000 combat aircraft, a defense budget of $886 billion. One rule: no nuclear weapons. Conventional warfare only. 3 phases. What the US loses in Phase 1 stays lost in Phase 2. There is no resupply from the future. The exhaustion compounds. Phase 1. The early War Armies, 1939 to 1942. The first wave arrives in early war configuration. The Wehrmacht of 1939 to 1941, before Stalingrad, before the Eastern Front, drained an entire generation. The Imperial Japanese Army and Navy at peak confidence weeks after sinking a battleship fleet from the air. The Italian Royal Army, early British and French forces, combined strength approximately 18 to 22 million soldiers. The Wehrmacht alone fields 3.8 million men in 150 divisions. Japanese naval aviation contributes 6 fleet carriers, over 400 aircraft. The same force that destroyed the US Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor in a single morning. The technological gap is 80 years. F-22s engage Messerschmitt Bf-109s at beyond visual range distances. The German pilots never see what kills them. JDAM strikes dismantle trench networks that took weeks to build. The first 2 weeks resemble less a war than a demonstration. But here is what the US Air Force did not anticipate. Japanese naval aviators trained to attack at low altitude under radar coverage at night. A formation of 40 torpedo bombers flying at 200 feet at 2 a.m. is a different problem than a supersonic fast mover. 3 US destroyers are lost in the first 2 weeks. 2 to Japanese aerial torpedoes, 1 to a German E-boat attack on a supply convoy nobody modeled for. The first proof that these armies can find the gaps. These are the armies your grandfather's generation fought against, fought alongside, or watched on the newsreels. Outmatched by every modern metric, they advance anyway, because their doctrine assumed losses were the price of ground, not a reason to stop taking it. On the ground, the M1A2 Abrams is invulnerable to everything Phase 1 fields. The Wehrmacht falls back, but deliberately, forcing American logistics to stretch, ammunition to deplete, and time to pass. US losses in Phase 1, between 4,000 and 9,000 killed, approximately 12 aircraft lost, no tanks destroyed by direct fire. The US wins. But the Wehrmacht did not need to defeat the United States. It needed to cost it. It succeeded. Phase 2. The Mid-War Armies, 1942 to 1944. This is where the mathematics gets serious. The second wave brings armies that survived years of industrial total war. The Red Army of 1943, rebuilt after losing 5 million men in 1941 alone, running a combined arms doctrine earned through catastrophe. The Wehrmacht of 1942 to 1943, equipped with Tiger I and Panther tanks. The US Army of 1944, Sherman tanks, B-17 bombers. The force that crossed the Channel at Normandy, now fighting against the country that built it. Combined additional manpower, approximately 35 to 40 million soldiers. Phase 1 depleted an estimated 40% of US precision munitions reserves. There are 1.4 million American soldiers now facing a force that outnumbers them by more than 40 to 1. The Panther's 75mm gun defeats the side and rear armor of an Abrams, not the front, but in an ambush at night in a European city, it is a different calculation. The Battle of Kursk involved 6,000 tanks on a single front. Imagine 40,000 attacking simultaneously against an armored force that cannot be replaced. But here is what the second wave understood that the first never learned. The Red Army did not try to match technology with technology. It traded space for time, pulled US forces deeper into extended supply lines, and applied Soviet partisan doctrine against American logistics convoys. Fuel trucks burned the same in any era. These are the men who held Stalingrad through the winter of 1942, who crossed the Volga under artillery fire with one rifle between two soldiers and orders to keep moving. They are now pointed at one exhausted modern army, and they are not in a hurry. US losses in Phase 2, between 80,000 and 140,000 killed. Approximately 400 aircraft lost, between 200 and 350 tanks destroyed. The US wins Phase 2, but combat power is reduced by 30 to 40%. Every reserve formation is committed. The word victory now requires a footnote. Phase 3, the late war peak, 1944 to 1945. The third wave is the most dangerous force the 20th century produced. The Red Army of 1945, 11.3 million soldiers, 35,000 tanks, 15,000 combat aircraft. The force that destroyed the Wehrmacht in under a year after Stalingrad. The Imperial Japanese military in final defensive configuration, entrenched, fanatical, with no equivalent in modern doctrine. The US Army of 1944, 8 million soldiers, B-29 super fortresses, the logistics system that supplied an entire continent of war. Combined additional strength, 25 to 30 million soldiers against a US military at 60% of original capacity. Precision munitions are below operational minimums. The Air Force is rationing Hellfire missiles. Artillery is switching to unguided rounds. An F-35 still kills a Yak-9. An Abrams still defeats a T-34 at any range. But an Abrams that runs out of fuel because Soviet armored columns cut the supply road at night is no longer a technological asset. It is a 68-ton obstacle. US armored units are fighting in place rather than maneuvering, the one scenario modern armor doctrine is designed to avoid. The Red Army does not need parity. It was built to absorb losses that would collapse any Western force and keep advancing. At Stalingrad, it took 1.1 million casualties and emerged on the offensive. Here, it does not need to defeat the US military. It needs to outlast it. These are not faceless numbers. They are the survivors of Kursk and Leningrad, of siege winters that killed more men than most countries put into uniform. They watched their cities burn and kept fighting. They are not afraid of a modern army. They have never been afraid of anything. The US wins every individual engagement in Phase 3. It runs out of the resources to keep having them. Total US losses, between 200,000 and 320,000 killed. Approximately 1,100 to 1,400 aircraft lost, between 800 and 1,200 tanks destroyed. Precision munitions at 0. Final verdict. Phase 1, the US defeats the early war armies decisively. The cost is ammunition and time, neither recoverable. Phase 2, the US defeats the mid-war armies but loses 30 to 40% of combat power. Phase 3, the US does not win. Outnumbered 70 to 1 with nothing left in reserve, it is ground down by attrition. Total US dead, between 200,000 and 320,000. Total World War II losses, between 40 and 60 million. The kill ratio is extraordinary. The United States kills between 125 and 200 enemies for every American lost. It wins every battle. It loses the war. The US military was not built for this. It was designed to fight a peer adversary for a defined period in a defined theater with a political framework for how it ends. Not 70 million soldiers with no end date and no exit. The strongest does not mean unbeatable. It never has.